Hello and welcome to our webcast today on employee engagement survey best practices. Today we'll be sharing best practices on how to set up, administer, report, and then roll out your employee engagement survey results. My name is Charles Rogel, and I'm the Vice President of Products and Marketing here at DecisionWise. Our presenters today are Tennille Rodman.
Hello.
And David Long.
Hello.
Tennille is an assessment consultant here at DecisionWise, and she leads a team of assessment advisors who administer surveys for clients around the world. She also is an expert on how to conduct employee engagement surveys and get the most from the results. Dave Long is an organization development consultant here at DecisionWise, and he works with clients around the world to debrief their employee engagement survey results and then provide interventions to improve organization performance. Dave holds an MBA, and he's previously worked for Vanguard Group, Wells Fargo, and Adobe. One thing I forgot to mention about Tennille, you're working on an advanced statistics degree right now, is that right?
Yeah, predictive analytics.
That's what it is, right.
From love data and numbers.
Is it at Northwestern?
Northwestern.
Excellent. So she loves looking at spreadsheets all day long, in fact. DecisionWise now has been in business since 1996. We specialize in conducting employee engagement surveys and then helping our clients use the feedback to promote organization change and improvement. Our focus is really on using feedback and turning it into results. This webcast is scheduled for 60 minutes. Everyone's going to be on mute, so if you have questions, please use the question tool to submit them. We'll try to address those questions as we go. We might reserve a few for the end of the presentation. This webcast has been approved for 1 hour of HRCI credit and 1 PDC, that's a professional development credit from SHRM. After the presentation, I'll send an email that includes the activity codes for both organizations, and you can redeem your free credit. And I'll also give you some links to some of the materials that we'll be talking about today. So there's some white papers and sample surveys coming your way as well. So let's begin then by talking about what we typically see with a lot of organizations. They typically fall into one of these 4 different categories. We call them outcome levels. It's what they're kind of expecting will happen as they conduct an employee engagement survey. And Tennille and David, do you want to talk about these different phases and kind of how it transforms from one to the other?
Sure. As an organization, if you're just starting the engagement process and really creating that culture of feedback, the first time that you do an engagement survey, you're really trying to establish your baseline. So you want to make sure that you have some good engagement questions in there, that you have a developed survey that will get you good results. But a lot of our first-time clients are really just trying to establish a baseline. We don't want them to bite off more than they can chew in that first year. If you already have a culture of engagement, then you can move towards, after you have your baseline, have executives really take part in the action planning process and maybe have some high-level results that come out of the engagement survey. And then as you do surveys over the years, or if you have that culture of feedback, then you can get into disseminating the results down to the manager level. And so then you have individual action plans at the manager level that tie into the overall initiatives at the company-wide level. You get into this more transformational type of engagement process when you have more people getting results and really everything being integrated into a good engagement, culture of feedback there. And then you get into more of an organizational development and change process.
Yeah, when you get into that change process, really what you're seeing is that some of the things that, or the outcomes from your surveys, start being built into your leadership development and your training, into your processes overall, and you really become an organization that is really about engagement, that people go there and they feel engaged in their work. Now, it might be tempting to say, hey, I'm early in the process, I still want to do all of this. It's very hard to do this all very early in the process. Establishing a baseline is critical, of course, when you're moving forward, but when you're early in the process, maybe as far as you can really hope to go would be to executive team action planning. And then as you become more developed and more adept at creating action plans, then it makes sense to push to the manager level and ultimately start building these things into your programs and into your training.
So Dave, as you were talking, I launched a poll just to find out where our audience feels they are in this continuum. So if you haven't already, please take a moment to choose an answer there. Tell us which box your organization best fits in, and then we'll know better kind of how to tailor our presentation today, and we'll share the results with you here in a moment. So I guess as we look at these different phases, which one is really best, or does it just kind of depend on your experience with where you are in the process?
What I would say, yeah, I think it does depend. Thank you for teeing me up there, Charles. Yeah, I think it does depend on where you are in the process. If you want to jump directly to training, leadership development, organizational development in your first year, it might be possible. It might be possible in order to do that, like if you have enough information and you've had a history of kind of working with these things in the past. But it may be that you're doing it without enough information. You haven't established a baseline. You haven't established a year-over-year trend. So it may be that you're jumping to kind of the end of the game a little too early. But ultimately, I think you want to get to the end of that.
Yeah, and you really want to make sure that confidentiality is addressed. Whenever you have a survey, you're soliciting feedback. It may be sensitive. Your employees are testing you that first year that you do a survey to say, okay, are you really going to keep this confidential? Am I going to be identified? And that can play significantly into the process of how far down you start action planning and really get into that transformational part of the process.
So I've closed the polls and shared the results, and here's what we can see. 29% of the audience is in that established baseline phase. Only 13% are in that executive action planning phase. 31% are doing manager action planning, and then 27% are using the results to drive training and leadership development in the organization. So that's kind of a little bit interesting. Usually we see kind of an even split, but there's a little bit less in that executive phase and more in the more advanced stages. That's good news. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and go back to our slides. So this leads into the next conversation, is kind of how do you kind of eat this elephant? You know, as you want to kind of roll out the results and be in that third or that fourth phase, what is a good roadmap to use? And so Tennille, I'll have you kind of address some best practices here.
Yeah, as we've already talked about, sometimes year one can just be about establishing a baseline and communicating that everything's going to be kept confidential. Whenever you do an engagement survey, you are putting out there the expectations that the employees can have of the company. So if you say, my manager regularly recognizes me, if that's one of your questions on the survey, you're saying that all of our managers should recognize employees, and so you're communicating to them what the expectations are, and it can be a little bit difficult to be realized. Maybe you're not where you would expect, and so the first year that you get all of this data back, it can be overwhelming, and so just having that baseline is good going forward. Having a little bit of executive planning, having that awareness sense of where the organization is, and then the next year you can get more into year-over-year trends. Have we improved? Maybe a little bit more of a demographic breakout. You want to start looking at managers versus non-managers, and then maybe tying in some business metrics. So if you have customer sat or safety metrics or performance metrics, you want to say, okay, how is engagement affecting some of these other things? And then by year 3 or year 4, you can start implementing engagement into leadership development scorecards, or having some trainings around engagement and trainings around leadership development, really maybe implementing a 360 manager program. There's all different kinds of leadership development programs that you can get, but you don't want to start there and kind of implement all of these things. It takes time for an organization to change.
Yeah, I think that's the message here with the information that we're sharing with you right now, is that it does take time and it is a process. If it is the first year, and it looked like a bunch of people were kind of establishing a baseline from the poll,
yeah.
If it is the first year that you're doing it, one thing that we really like to do is get executives together and get maybe some high-level managers together and do what we call an engagement summit, where we try to prioritize the things that are in the survey. And well, the nice thing about the first year is that oftentimes you'll see some low-hanging fruit that you can pick off. And so when we say do something, it means really address, not 10 or 15 different things from the survey, but maybe 2 or 3 things from the survey, and getting all the executives together and getting together some of the high-level managers, you can kind of say, okay, organizationally, this is something that we need to do better without really focusing on individual teams. We're just focusing on the overall organization, and you can get some mileage out of, really addressing some of the low-hanging fruit and making sure that you do something with the survey in the first year.
I think people that want to do more, in that second year or third year, kind of combine it all in 1 year, you need to make sure you have the resources in place so you have an adequate staff that can help with all the action planning and the rollout of the results and a lot of the meetings that you'll be holding afterwards. And if you already are doing leadership development and training and you have a pretty good program in place, then definitely you can use the results to drive some of those initiatives that you're doing. But again, if you know your organization is somewhat slow in rolling out things, you might want to stick to the year 1 goals and follow the roadmap that we've outlined here. So I'd like to talk about this definition of employee engagement. I think some organizations go into this a little haphazard without really thinking through what their definition for engagement is and really training their managers on having an understanding of it. So I think most people are aware of what the term is, but maybe not what it really means. Dave, do you want to talk about our definition here?
Yeah, and the definition is employee engagement is an emotional state where we feel passionate, energetic, and committed toward our work. When we feel like that, we fully invest our best selves, our hearts, spirits, hands, and minds into the work that we do. And so if we had done this survey, or if we did this maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we might not have called it an engagement survey. We might have called it a satisfaction survey.
Yeah.
And a satisfaction survey was really, to measure whether or not somebody was achieving a base level of satisfaction in the work. So if you can see what's on the screen now, satisfaction, we use words like transactional and contractual to define satisfaction. So satisfaction are things like, am I paid enough?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have health insurance benefits? Am I safe when I come to work? Do I have the tools and resources I need while I'm at work? So there are things that, you don't go home at the end of the day and say, hey, I had a great day because my computer was functioning.
Yeah.
Unless your computer never functions, right? And if your computer is never functioning, then at the end of the day, that becomes the most important part of your day. The fact that your tools and your resources weren't working, or the fact that I did not feel safe, or the fact that I can't provide for my family, that becomes the most important thing about your employment. So when we're talking about satisfaction, we want to make sure, of course, that all of those satisfactional elements are covered for all employees. And so we do, as a best practice in our surveys, we cover the satisfaction element. But we are going now beyond satisfaction, where that's more of a transactional state, into more of a transformational area. And that's where we're saying, all the satisfaction items are covered. Now we're looking at, okay, can we engage at a higher level using our hearts, spirits, minds, and hands? So as we've done research over the years, we've collected literally millions of responses in employee engagement data, and as we've kind of correlated that to overall engagement or to a state of engagement, what we found is that it really, in many cases, will boil down to 5 drivers of engagement, and that's what you're seeing on the screen. Magic, we call it magic. It's not really magical. It's very practical in terms of application, but it's nice to be able to remember something with an easy acronym like this. But just going through each of these, and hopefully they're intuitive to you. Meaning, does my work have purpose? Is what's important to me important also to the organization? Autonomy, do I have the trust from the organization to do my best work? Do I have the trust to decide how I'm going to accomplish my tasks? Growth, this goes beyond positional growth. This isn't really advancement in the organization, although that can play a factor here. Yeah. It's more, am I stretched day to day? The things that I'm working on a daily basis are those things that are sparking growth in me, or are these things that are helping me to develop? Impact, it's related to meaning. I understand why the organization exists. I understand the purpose of the organization. Do I understand my role in that purpose? Connection, am I connected to the overall organization? Am I connected to people around me? Do I have friends do I enjoy working with the people around me? Do I have a good relationship with my manager? So all of these 5 things kind of combined to create more of an engaged state for individual employees. And you can kind of look at this for yourself as you go through and you think about your own job. what are the factors that are really impacting my own engagement? And a lot of people say, well, I find a lot of meaning in my work, or I'm growing day to day. But there are different factors, and it'll be in varying degrees for each individual. But we find these common with organizations. So especially like meaning, if people are doing a lot of meaningful work, you might see a high score for the organization in meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I conducted an employee survey recently, and the executives really wanted us to do this driver analysis, and not surprisingly, these magic components showed up in that driver analysis. What is really driving engagement? And we're going to talk about how we measure engagement through anchor questions, but as we took engagement levels and we did the driver analysis, meaning showed up really strongly for these employees, and some of these other magic components, which really tell us that these are the things that drive employee engagement.
And I think we find that over and over as we do driver analysis, that it's usually you take 3 of these and maybe one other thing from the organization that might be driving engagement.
So I'll take a moment to do a plug for our book here, Magic, the 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement. All the information we're sharing basically is contained in the book. It's an award-winning book as well. We got an Axiom Award last year for it. So it's a great read. We'd recommend it to you. It gives you a great background on how managers can really improve engagement. So Tennille, you touched on this topic of measuring engagement, and I've got up here our anchor questions. You want to explain how that, what some best practices are around measuring engagement?
So we all want to know, are our employees engaged? Are they or are they not? And we use these anchor questions, as you can see on the screen here. We use these questions. They're not really actionable items. You can't help somebody love their job, directly. You can't make them want to come to work every day. And so, these are what we call kind of outcomes of engagement. Are they engaged? And those magic components we just talked about, those are inputs to engagement. If I have meaning, if I have growth opportunities, I can become engaged. But we want to measure whether or not someone is or is not. Now, we don't have it on a dichotomous scale. We found that engagement really is on a spectrum. And so by combining the responses to these anchor questions, we can determine what engagement category the employee can fall into. So they could be fully engaged. Their hearts, hands, and minds are really invested in their work. They're giving their discretionary effort. They can also be key contributors. People are answering favorably to these anchor questions. Key contributors are your strong and steady. You also have people we put in the opportunity group. These are what we call fence sitters. You have an opportunity to sway them towards engagement, or the fully disengaged people are going to sway them the other way. So we find engagement really is on a spectrum, and there's not a lot of organizations that I've seen that have half their organization fully disengaged. People want to come to work and give their best selves to the work. And so I've actually found that people in that fully disengaged category, a lot of times are in the wrong job fit. They're in the wrong job role that's not utilizing their skills, and eventually they do leave the organization. And hopefully we can help persuade them out sooner, but really it's a small percentage. So what we like to focus is on that opportunity group. How can we get them more engaged?
The opportunity group, what we see with them, interestingly, on year-over-year survey results, we see the opportunity group moving into other areas. They'll either move up, down, or out of the organization on the whole.
Yeah.
And so therefore we know we have the ability to influence that group either for the positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm showing now kind of some of the characteristics or attributes of people in these different groups that you all kind of touched on already. And before we were showing kind of the distribution, and so most people we find are engaged in their work. Some are fully engaged, some are in that key contributor group. But the good news is that, like you said, Tennille, most people want to be engaged in their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I found this is really helpful to kind of, we all know if you're a leader of a team, you kind of know who's disengaged or maybe on the fence. And so I walk into executive meetings all the time, and they say, well, just give me the names of the fully disengaged people. And obviously I can't do that for confidentiality reasons. But if we say, by the time we do the survey the next time, they're gone. And we do those migration analysis to see where they move, and 99% of the time they're out.
I've been asked the same question, Tennille. Tell me who my fully disengaged are. Mm-hmm. But the truth is about fully disengaged is they do not hide very well in the organization.
Yeah.
They don't hide. In fact, it's very easy to identify them, and And one thing we sometimes say about the fully disengaged, and to your point, Neil, everybody wants to be engaged in something. Well, the fully disengaged people are fully engaged in being disengaged, whether that be recruiting others or gossiping or making jokes. I mean, they're engaged in something.
Or engaged in Facebook or whatever.
Right, whatever it might be.
I just showed this clip of the engagement or the migration analysis you talked about to Neil, so that you can.
Yeah. So this is actually really cool that we've done with clients year over year. We look at their engaged populations, and then where have they moved. So we're looking at fully engaged, if they stay fully engaged, or if they're moving to the opportunity group, or fully disengaged. And I've actually started doing analysis on this about, we call them new positives or new negatives. And so we're looking at people who are in the opportunity group and they move to fully engaged or key contributors. What are some of the factors? And we do a crosstab of their results. And we found, a lot of times it could have to do with the supervisor. They might get a new supervisor that provides them more recognition or gives them, better work assignments. It can have to do with recognition or some of the connection components. Connection is really important to them, and it's always the highest scoring questions about team cohesion, and so that can really impact someone's engagement levels.
So let me, here's a comment from Sarah. She says, in her experience, the degree to which the ownership of the company engages with and responds to the employees has a tremendous effect on the level of engagement, not universally, but pretty frequently. And that's pretty important. So if the company is committed, the employees see that, they trust that, and they respond.
And I'll take that a step forward or further and say, sometimes when we see leadership changes, that's when we see the biggest the swings in engagement. So maybe speaking more on the micro level, but when we work with individual locations and you see a leadership change, you're going to see probably some movement there, either positive or negative, and that speaks to the role that leaders play in engagement in the organization.
So I want to transition now and talk about best practices in terms of the survey itself. How do you create a survey? What type of questions do you ask? How do you set it up? I've got a sample survey that we're showing on the screen now. And the survey here includes about 50 questions. We've got it separated into different categories. Neil, do you want to talk about kind of good practice when it comes to creating a survey?
Yeah. So we ask survey questions, as I mentioned earlier. You're really stating or communicating to your employees what the expectations are. But we like to put them in frames of reference. They're easier to think about in that way. So questions relating to my job, my team, my supervisor, and then my organization. And we found that grouping them into these frames of reference makes it so they can take the survey in 8 to 12 minutes. They don't have rater fatigue. But also an industry standard is to use a 5-point Likert scale, which is agree, strongly agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. And so we found that to be the best practice. And when you're looking at benchmarks across industries, across other organizations, you'll want to use a 5-point scale. Now, we also include a don't know option because this helps us validate our survey questions. So if we have a question about senior leadership or something that people may not know, we don't want them marking neutral because neutral is a valid response. We want them to mark don't know, and then we can evaluate if we want to keep that survey item for the next year.
Yeah, and I think that really helps to really keep the neutral category clean. And so one of the first explanations that, when I'm presenting this information that I'll get when I have a high neutral is, oh, people just didn't know. Well, they actually had the option of saying that they don't know or that it's not applicable to them on the survey. So that's not the explanation. So let's look and see what is the explanation.
Yeah. I also get asked this all the time. Can we have open-ended comments after every question or every section? And the best practice is to have 2 at the end of the survey. I strongly encourage this because having them after every question or every section can induce rater fatigue. Again, it makes the survey very lengthy. And they've been answering the questions as we flow through the frames of reference. They're being primed to think about things that they like or that they dislike about the organization. And I find, if something really sticks in their mind or if it wasn't asked, there's an opportunity at the end of the survey to write it. And obviously these questions aren't required, but we find that there's a lot of really good information in these comments, and so we can do common analysis on that. But one thing I've been asked lately is, well, if somebody disagrees, can a comment box just pop up and write why they disagree? I would caution on that, because then people are just going to change their answer to agree. So you might not get the most valid responses if you're forcing them to comment every time. And so you got to think about those things as you're designing a survey.
Can you touch on the importance of customizing a survey?
Yeah, for benchmarking purposes, you would think it might be best just to have an out-of-the-box standard survey that we ask every organization. But I found that organizations are unique, just like people, and they have different nuances, different values, and different things that they're interested in seeing. And so, again, you're communicating to employees what the expectation is. If you have a manufacturing environment, you need to ask about safety, because that definitely impacts engagement. That's one of those satisfaction components. But if everyone's in an office, you don't need to ask about safety. And so you really want to customize it to the organization to understand the levels of engagement, but also the culture of that company. So obviously we want to keep some of the engagement anchor questions and keep a good set. You're always going to want to ask about supervisor recognition and some of those other things that play into engagement, but I think it's important to have a custom element, to have a few questions pertaining directly to the company.
Every company is different. The example that I sometimes give is we ask a question about autonomy, whether or not people have the freedom to perform their best work. Okay, so that might look differently in a software developing company than like an accounting company or an auditing company. You know, the degree to which you would want to make people communicate to people that they have the freedom to, go off and do whatever they want. It's going to be different depending on the company that you work for. So it is critical that you customize the survey.
Can you also touch on frequency? So is it better to do an annual survey or multiple pulse surveys throughout the year, or both?
Yeah, this is a question that comes up a lot, and I've been asked by my clients. I think it's a good practice to do the survey every 12 to 18 months, because it gives you a pulse, it gives you a baseline, and it keeps it as, if an ongoing event that people know they're going to be asked their opinions. There's the expectation there. When you start surveying like an ongoing survey or every month, then people are going to stop taking it, and you're going to get these polarizing views. So either people who are really happy or really not happy are going to answer it, and everyone else is just going to say, well, it's going to come every month, and then they'll ignore it. And so if you really kind of brand it as a company event, the opportunity to share your voice, I found it to be very successful to do it once a year is what I recommend, every 12 months.
I agree with that. And in some cases, if there are some special items that you're really trying to improve and wanting to know kind of maybe on a quarterly basis if you're improving that, maybe it would make sense to do a pulse. But you don't do the whole survey. You just pulse on maybe 3 or 4 of the questions that you're trying to improve, and see if you've moved the needle on that. And you don't do it to everybody. You might select a portion of the organization, sample the organization, take a random cross-section of the organization in order to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of it depends on logistics too. So it's easy if you're in an office and everyone's got an email and that is at a computer. It's different in a manufacturing environment or maybe a distributed retail environment where it takes a lot of effort to get people to take surveys. Might be paper surveys involved, and so that yearly survey might be all that you can really manage.
That's true.
So let me change gears here and talk more about reporting. So here we want to address kind of who gets reports, how are the results rolled out, how should you break up the data, best practices in using demographics and that sort of thing. What I'm showing now is our online reporting tool in our dashboard view here, where we're looking at highest and lowest scores and some overall data with a population of about 1,004 people. So Keneal, do you want to address some of those topics as we?
Yeah, so typically we'll have a couple different views of the results. We'll give HR access to a comprehensive view so they can see, the demographics that we have available, tenure, gender, age, manager status, all of those demographics. But then once we start moving into directors and then managers, we eliminate some of the data that's available for them to see simply because we want to protect confidentiality. If with smaller populations, you don't want to disseminate demographic cuts down to them. So you have to think about the different levels, the different populations that you have, and really confidentiality always needs to be the top concern. Are we keeping results at a confidential level? Decision-wise never gives results with less than 5 in a group. That pertains to actual teams of people and also to demographic cuts. So you really want to think about confidentiality, but then you know, comments can be a tricky and sensitive subject. So if we allow these open-ended comments, who gets access to see those? Do they get to see verbatims? Do they get to see summaries? I found it's actually a good practice if this is the first time you've done the survey, confidentiality is an issue, to just give kind of a high-level summary to vice presidents or directors of the comments, and of course HR needs to read them. I always think it's a good practice for HR to read the comments, but then you figure out what's best for your organization as you go further down. Maybe we don't release comments to managers until we've established that culture of feedback, we've established that confidentiality barrier, and then maybe the 3rd or 4th year you could give comments to managers.
So the ability I'm showing here to kind of drill down into your comments and sort by different keywords and that sort of thing usually is what HR has, or maybe the executive team. Mm-hmm. And of course it's limited to, you know, different populations. If you get too small of a group, you're not going to be able to see all the comments from people. Can you talk about how you collect or maybe aggregate the results by different demographic groups, or versus, in terms of asking the questions on the survey, or coding it on the back end, loading a list and using it that way?
You want the most valid data, and so we found that in order to have accurate data, it's best to code the demographics on the back end. So decision-wise can track the responses and add the demographics to those, and that way you're not having people answer the questions on the survey. So if you ask someone, identify your gender, identify your department, and you ask them 5 demographics, they're going to say, well, of course you can figure out who I am because I'm the only female in this department. Yeah. By decision-wise adding those on, behind the scenes, we're able to control that nothing below 5 get reported out. So if there's only 2 females in this department, they'll never be able to see a female score for this department. And as I said, our threshold is 5. So really, if you ask questions on the survey, you run the risk of people answering the wrong demographics for whatever reason, or maybe they don't know which department they are in if they straddle 2 different departments. But also people just won't answer them, and then you can't cut your data by different demographics. And so you really want those demographic cuts because it gives you a unique perspective. If your managers are really overworked and stressed out, looking at their results or showing a statistic of manager versus non-manager can be very eye-opening and say, okay, we've got some work to do right here in helping our managers manage their time or manage their stress load. So it can be very impactful, but you want to make sure you have accurate data.
So in order to give the manager their own report, right? So if you're doing action planning for managers and they're getting the results, they're getting the results just for their own work group. Mm-hmm. And that is what you're coding on the back end, so you know which group everyone's in. You can ask that on the survey, but sometimes it's inaccurate.
Yeah, I've done that before where I ask them to check the box next to their manager's name, and then I give results to a manager, and there's 12 responses, and he says, well, I only have 8 people. So then you've got some people in the wrong, and so your data, it gets diluted, and then you're like, well, is this even accurate, and how do I take action if I'm sure it's not correct?
Yeah, they start discounting the results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Another question that came in, so in the case where you're kind of tracking this, does each employee have a unique, this is from Linda, does each employee have a unique link to the survey? Can the link be shared and used by more than one employee? How do you kind of manage that?
Yeah, so that's a little tricky, but yes, if we're sending this out via email, then each link is unique, and the demographics are embedded in that email link. So once the survey is taken, then it's marked as complete. It can't be taken again. And we ask that people don't forward them just so that every employee has the opportunity to take it one time.
Mm-hmm.
We're not, having some manager go in and take 10 surveys and trying to skew the results.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do it through unique links. But we have other ways, with a paper survey. We put a barcode on that for our purposes, and then we can add all of these things on the back end.
Can you talk about best practices in promoting participation, getting high response rates?
Yeah, everyone wants 100% participation, and going into your survey with that expectation, I've had a couple organizations that, get 98 or 99 because they're really trying. We found that if you have a good communication plan up front, if you have the CEO or an executive sponsor championing the process, they've communicated to employees that this is really important, they really want to hear their voice, HR communicates the process, they say, we're really keeping this confidential, using an outside provider, that will really generate more participation. And our average rate is about 76% participation. I think industry-wide it's more like 40 or 50%. Really, to get good data, you want something upwards of 75%.
I would say don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're the different organization and that you're the one that is going to get 100%, and that's what you communicate to everybody, that we're getting 100%. Because it's just not likely. Possible, yes, of course. Is it likely? It's probably not. So you don't want to communicate that we're expecting 100% participation on this if you're not probably going to get 100% participation. Now, having said that, I know all of you are taking this as a personal challenge that you will now.
Yeah, and sometimes we find VPs will be competitive, and so we have the ability to track in real time, and so if you have that competition going on, or maybe there are a couple of prizes, that can also encourage participation, which I think is fine.
When is it good to use paper surveys? So, there's organizations that say, well, our employees don't have access to a computer, but we're going to pass around an iPad and have them all taken online. Is that a good idea? Which works better?
Yeah, paper surveys can be the best option, and I think maybe mistakenly we think it's not the best option. But, if you have people and they're really, you have production goals and you don't have, time for one employee at a time to take a survey on an iPad and passing that around, that can eat up a lot of your time. If you have, restaurant workers or production line, assembly line, or even retail or nurses, it might be best to hand out 10 paper surveys. They take 10 minutes at the beginning of their shift. They all take it. They put it in a ballot box, and then they're done. That can be the best option and the fastest option for the organization.
Now, to get the individual results, then, are those surveys barcoded and handed to an individual employee?
Yeah, so we never suggest a paper survey be handed back to the manager. It needs to be handed to an employee ambassador who has been tasked with the survey, or going straight into a ballot box that then comes back to the survey vendor that you're using. That's the best practice to make sure that the surveys are kept confidential.
And each survey will have, the way that we do it, and this is maybe just in terms of best practice, but the way we do it, like you said, a barcode, but then we also, so that the employee knows that it's their survey, we have a detachable part at the top that says their name and their department, and they can take that off so that whatever answers are there are very confidential to the people around them.
So Belinda asks, how do organizations typically encourage or induce participation, and then what do you do to mitigate using the tool as a complaint box?
Yeah, interesting question. So how do we encourage participation? I have had a lot of clients use many avenues. You could use, if you have real-time access to participation numbers, you can have a competition. You can have, message boards in your break room that's showing the daily totals, and so people are talking about it. You can have flyers up saying, this is the week the survey is open. Everybody, take time to go do the survey. We really sometimes provide a manager toolkit or tools to managers to help encourage it. If managers know they're going to get a report and let's say they have 10 people, they know they have to have at least 5 people take the survey. And if they know that they're getting a report, they're going to encourage that. So there's a lot of different avenues, banners, and different communication avenues that you can use.
So we also encourage, reminder emails if it's an email survey that go out, several times throughout the process. But some organizations even brand their survey. So every year when it comes up, it's the same kind of branding. So it could be like speak up or share your voice. That sort of branding that people recognize it. So when they hear that, they're like, oh, okay, this is time to give our thoughts.
Yeah, I have a client who uses the survey during the Employee Appreciation Week. Every year, it's Employee Appreciation Week, and part of that is the survey. And so,
we get high response.
Yeah, it's true.
High results.
To answer your second question, obviously not having a comment box after every question, or to have an open-ended comment to say what are all the things that you don't like. I have clients who, subtly influence the way that those are answered. So they say, what are 1 or 2 things we could do to improve? So that way it's not this huge, long laundry list of things that are wrong. They may also word the question to say, what would make this a great place to work, rather than what are the things that we're doing badly. So you can word it in a way that and really focuses in on what you want, productive feedback.
And I'd say in my experience that it usually does not become a complaint box. For the most part. I mean, it's not something that I think we usually will see. Most of the time people are very positive. They work there, they want to continue working there, and they're doing what they can to improve their conditions.
So Nicole asks, what if you find contradictions in the results? For example, I enjoy working with my colleagues is high, but I trust my colleagues is low. Have you seen anything like that with people?
That's a good question. I don't think I've seen 2 questions with like a 50-50 opposition.
Yeah.
I think there are times where one department will feel very negatively about something that's a strength in the rest of the organization. So you can use that to really have a targeted action plan for that. I've seen comments that are, I love the benefits, I hate the benefits, and so you kind of weigh, are 70% saying they love it and 30% saying they hate it? Are there different populations? Or, if you have acquisitions, is there a particular company that's not fully merged into the whole organization? So I would say take it with your demographics to figure out where the anomalies are.
One that I sometimes see is, my job provides me with opportunities to learn and grow is high, but I have advancement opportunities at this organization is low. But to me, those are 2 different things. But you can say, oh, those contradict each other. But really, advancement opportunities has something to do with it, not all to do with learning opportunities. The other, like the example that was given here I don't trust my coworkers, but I like working with them. Well, then, you might think about, okay, how does trust impact them in a way that doesn't relate to their interpersonal relationships? So is it slowing down the way work is done, that sort of thing. So you kind of have to take everything, I think, really individually.
We have an example in our sample data here, number 7. I feel challenged to stretch in my job in a way that promotes or results in personal growth. It's really high. However, the lowest scoring question is the level of stress in my job is manageable and the amount of work I have is reasonable. So you can see that people are feeling overworked and they're challenged, but maybe not in a good way.
Yeah, good point.
Linda asks a question about how to handle languages on the survey. Which ones are typically available, and how do you kind of distribute languages?
So we conduct surveys with employees all over the world. So it's actually, if they're taking the survey online, it's real easy to just have them select the language that they'd like to take the survey in. If I have a client with people in Spain, Portugal, France, U.S., and Mexico, and so we default to the languages of those countries, and then they can choose to take it in English if they want to do it.
Or sometimes I've seen you have 2, you have English and Spanish.
On the same survey. Yep, we've done that before where if, in the U.S., Spanish is becoming more popular, and so, or more common, and so we could put both of them on a survey, and then they can just read whichever one.
And I don't think we've ever said no to a language request, so no matter how
that's a pretty strange
obscure the language, we always will work with that language. And I think that's important to take that, if you have diverse languages in your company, you really need to give the survey into the native language of that person.
Yeah, you do.
So here's a hard one. Lisa asks, if there's a trust issue and a COO wants all the manager's data, how do you handle this, especially if the managers feel retribution and don't want to participate? So the boss wants all the data or wants to see individual results. Do you get that question often?
Yeah, that is a hard one, and you kind of have to take it as kind of an individual, individual thing. In this case, it says, and a COO wants all the manager's data. Well, that you really have to evaluate that based on, what are the opinions of the HR leaders that are in charge of the survey, and also of the CEO in this case, right? The CEO would be involved. If it was the CEO, then it's a difficult position that you're putting everybody in. But you have to kind of, in my opinion, you have to, if there is a trust issue and you know that exists, you go out in front of that at the beginning of the survey and you identify there's a trust issue in our organization. So let's figure out who's going to get reports and who's going to get access to what before we even do it, and we communicate that so that it's not an issue later on.
And usually you're not asking demographics and you're not sharing the results that broadly. In this case, I'd say the CEO, you need to explain to him or her that, hey, you're not going to get good results. People know what this is going to be used for. They're going to either inflate the scores or not participate. And so you're not going to get the data you want. You won't be resolving anything. In fact, you'll probably be making things worse.
Yeah.
Good point. So I want to talk about, how you want to organize your results a little bit. We talked about measuring employee engagement and trying to dig into your results and really understand what's going on. What are some of the ways that you typically analyze the data, or you'd recommend organizations using the data to kind of create action plans?
Yeah, so some of the strategies will be to, one of the things that I really like to do is make sure that we're identifying the things that are really important to the organization. And so one thing that I'll do with executive teams is kind of evaluate, okay, here are your lowest scoring items. Of these items that are low scoring, which ones are having an impact on engagement? And you've got up here on the screen, Charles, an area where we can kind of look at that, look at the groups that are engaged or that are not engaged, and see, okay, where are they really having a hard time, or where is it really going well? So we can kind of identify themes that way, and we bring these themes together, and we bring executives and managers together, and even in some cases, some employees together, and we say, okay, which of these are really important, and which of these can we impact? Do we actually have the ability to impact? And then based on that, that's kind of how we come up with the 2 or 3 items that we're going to work on as an organization.
Yeah, and sometimes executives are really interested in attrition and turnover, and so we'll say, we'll make sure and have those questions on the survey, questions that relate to that. We could do a driver analysis based on that. We could give them an attrition index, and then that could play into the action planning later. If we say, these things are really driving your turnover, then let's focus in on those.
The important thing is to identify, I think, what is most important to the organization. And if it's important enough, even if it's really hard to change, it's still something you might want to tackle. So that's, I think, the important thing. And it's oftentimes difficult to really understand that, but you have to kind of bring your best minds together, bring your leaders together and say, okay, what is important based on what we're seeing on the survey and based on our personal experience, what's important.
And this is another reason why it's good to customize the survey. You don't want to ask a question that's not important to you and you're not planning on doing anything about, because if it shows up in your low scores, your employees are going to expect that something's going to happen.
Another question came in from Jackie. Can you suggest some methods to demonstrate to the leader of the organization that they need to conduct an employee engagement survey to get his or her buy-in? How do you sell this internally?
Yeah, that's a different, and it kind of depends on where they stand currently on the idea. A lot of times you can tie this back to productivity of workers, or you can tie this back to attrition, as Tennille's pointed out. Attrition is such a critical metric for the success of organizations because of the cost of attrition. And if your CEO is numbers driven or money driven, which many CEOs are, many CFOs are as well, you can kind of explain the impact of if we were able to, currently we're at 20% attrition, and if we move to 15% attrition, what's the actual dollars and cents cost savings that that's going to give us as an organization. Okay, well, then it makes intuitive sense and logical sense that engagement is a huge factor. Not just engagement, and satisfaction is also a huge factor in determining whether or not our employees are going to stay. And so if we can increase the level of engagement and satisfaction in the organization, we're able to reduce that cost. So a lot of times when we're talking to CEOs, we're talking to leaders of organizations, they do want to see, okay, I'm going to invest in this survey, what's going to be my benefit? And many times the benefit will be retention, and then there's a productivity benefit here as well that comes into play that's a little bit harder to measure, but there's that as well.
Yeah, I've also correlated it to performance metrics. So your key performers, they may not be you're fully engaged. It's not a one-to-one correlation all the time. They may be in your opportunity group, and so correlating it to that, I know there's a lot of research out there as well that correlates it to customer satisfaction, and we've even seen that with some of our clients where it's very clear that locations or departments that have higher customer satisfaction have higher engagement levels, and it correlates very nicely there.
And you can sell that as part of your pitch. We're going to correlate this to the level of customer satisfaction in the organization. If there's no correlation, which there will be no correlation, but if there's no correlation, then maybe it doesn't matter. But if there is a correlation, then clearly this matters.
Yeah, I'm flipping through some of these business metrics that we typically use, and what you said, Dave, about attrition is really important. We did a study recently where we asked organizations how important employee engagement was to the organization and how important was retention. Was that a focus? Those that responded that retention was one of their high priorities also responded that engagement was one of their high priorities. So they understood the need to boost engagement to retain their best people. And so if you're having a problem with that, or if you know those numbers, that's definitely the business case to make to your manager. I wanted to talk about action planning, best practices, and kind of how to roll out the results to managers. And so as we go back to our online reporting tool here, I'll show kind of an overall goal or action planning tool. And the idea really is to help different departments to create a goal behind or around employee engagement. So what their overall goal is, in this case, communication, team building, and growth are some goals, and there's different tasks that you can create. So, what are best practices in terms of getting managers to actually create an action plan? That seems to be a real hard one.
It is a hard one, and I've seen organizations struggle to get the buy-in. You have to first decide: are you going to make it required? Are you going to make it a suggestion or a strongly encouraged nicety?
Right.
So you have to decide. I would say, your first couple years, you're not going to want to require every manager to create an action plan. I definitely think the organization as a whole needs an action plan, and each higher level division needs to have an action plan that relates to that overall. So as David mentioned earlier, we've conducted summits before where we get executives in a room for a couple hours and get them aligned on what the organization's priorities are. And then divisional leaders and department leaders can create an action plan that aligns with that. And we use HR business partners to help with the accountability piece. Yeah. So action planning, organizational change is not going to happen unless you take action. And employees are not going to keep sharing their voice if nothing's going to happen. And so if you want to create that culture of feedback, keep the dialogue open, as Dave mentioned, look for some quick wins and implement those fairly quickly. And then have one or two long-term goals or strategies that you want the organization to focus on and integrate it into the way you talk about it, your meetings with managers, bring it up, and then get credit for the things that you're improving. So I had an organization where the leaders were not very visible, and so they implemented this program where the leaders of each division went around and they went on the road, so to speak, and they visited each location, and it really helped encourage engagement levels, just having that visibility there. And so they tied it back to say, look, we heard you, and they focused in on it, and they kept talking about it, and that action helped create that engagement in the organization.
I think the other important piece is really training your managers on employee engagement. So it's one thing to kind of give them results and they kind of look at it like a deer in the headlights and aren't quite sure what to do. But once they understand the meaning behind engagement, how it drives performance, and what they need to do about it, then they are more encouraged to actually use it. Some other things I know you've mentioned in the past, Tennille, are tying in some of their action plans to their yearly performance review. So their engagement goal, their goals for their team should be part of that, those ongoing discussions for their performance.
Yeah, so you definitely want to, it's all part of that conversation of improving. You don't want to tie the engagement score to their bonus or
right.
like their yearly salary increase, because then you're going to start getting cheating and some unethical things going on, which I have seen happen. But if it's one of your metrics, you have production goals, you have customer service goals, I think you should have an engagement goal. How are my employees feeling with engagement? And it will really help in those other areas as well as like we talked about.
One thing in terms of looking at the influence of engagement of managers on their direct reports, we did a study, and this was a large set of data. There's about 20,000 responses that we had here, and about 800 managers were in these. Actually, let me get my numbers right. 22 companies, 19,000 people, 2,300 managers. What we did is we broke out the results into those different engagement categories. So at the bottom, we're looking at the manager groups. So the fully engaged managers are here on the left, and then the fully disengaged managers are over on the right. Luckily, there's only 46 of those out of this population that we measured. And as you can see in the fully engaged group, the 808 managers that are here, there's a breakout between the engagement levels of those that they manage. So the people in their groups, there's 36% that are fully engaged, 48% are key contributors, and so on. So definitely, it's 163% higher, these fully engaged, this fully engaged population with your fully engaged managers as opposed to your fully disengaged managers. It's 50% higher than those key contributor managers. So you can see there's a correlation here between the engagement level of the manager and those that, and the engagement level of those people that they manage. Now, luckily, they don't. A fully disengaged manager doesn't
only have disengaged people.
Yeah, it doesn't absolutely kill engagement for everyone else. There's some people that are intrinsically engaged here, but if you can have more engaged managers, you can see the impact that that can have on an organization.
And when we talk about engagement, it's not all the organization or the manager's job to engage the employee. The employee has to decide to be engaged, and sometimes we talk about it as a 50-50 proposition. And I read an article recently about how it was 100% the organization's, opportunity or job to create that engagement. It's not. It's the employee has to decide if they want to be engaged, and then obviously factors from the manager and the organization can influence that as well.
Well, Tennille and Dave, that concludes our presentation today and our time as well. We want to thank everyone for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us on our next presentation. Look forward to my email today. I'm going to send an email out in about an hour with a link to the slides and our recording and some other information, as well as the codes for HRCI and SHRM credit. So I'll be sending that out today. If you don't get it, you can go ahead and ping me. I'll get that to you. But again, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you on our next presentation.